The Mechanics Podcast.
This is not the show you've been waiting for. This is the programming already running you. Together we built this clumsy civilization, belief by belief. Now we take the reins, working with the sublime machine nobody taught you to drive, your own mind. Welcome to the Mechanics Podcast. Last episode, belief moved millions of people at once. But does belief only work in a crowd? Can one person, completely alone, change what happens inside their own body? Their pain, how fast they heal, even how long they live, with nothing but what they believe? Let's look at the hard evidence and see what it really says about who we are, not who we'd like to be.
Welcome back to episode 2 of the Mechanics Podcast.
It is really good to be back at the table.
Yeah, it is. So if you were with us for our first episode, we started with the absolute widest lens possible.
Right, the macro view.
Exactly. We were looking at how the engineering of belief is basically humanity's oldest art, but we examined it on a massive civilizational scale.
Yeah, we were talking about the grand architectures of belief that span across entire continents, the structures that hold societies and economies together over centuries.
Right, the way a shared belief creates the physical boundaries of the world we live within. But today we are pulling that lens all the way in. We are pivoting away from the civilization and zooming down to the microscopic, localized environment of a single human body.
All the way down to the individual.
Yeah. We're looking at a huge stack of clinical trials and medical journals and historical case studies to examine a reality that is honestly hiding in plain sight. And we aren't starting with some sweeping philosophical theory today.
No, definitely not.
We are starting with an unavoidable, highly uncomfortable fact that is nestled deep inside what is arguably the most rigorously materialist, data-driven, evidence-based institution on Earth.
Which is modern medicine.
Exactly, modern medicine.
It is a reality that sits at the very foundation of how we approve and regulate and understand human health.
Right. So let's look at the immovable law of medical regulation. Before any drug anywhere in the world for any illness can be legally sold to a patient, it has to go through a gauntlet.
A massive one.
Yeah. I mean, a pharmaceutical company will spend a decade, sometimes 15 years in development. They employ literal armies of biochemists.
They utilize supercomputers to fold complex proteins and model molecular interactions.
Right. They spend hundreds of millions, frequently billions of dollars engineering a microscopic molecule designed to interface perfectly with a specific receptor on your cells.
And the sheer financial and logistical weight of that process is staggering. It represents the absolute pinnacle of our material understanding of biology.
And yet, after all of that time, all of that money, and all of that bleeding-edge science, the final boss this billion-dollar molecule has to defeat to prove its worth, the ultimate hurdle to get to market, is a pill containing absolutely nothing.
A blank.
A blank, usually pressed sugar or some other completely inert substance.
Yeah, that is the gold standard of the randomized controlled trial. Medicines cannot just test a drug against doing nothing. It has to test the drug against a fake drug.
It's just wild to me. It's like an aerospace company engineering a multi-billion-dollar hypersonic jet. And before the FAA allows it to fly, the company has to mathematically prove that their jet can outrace a cardboard box that someone drew wings on with a Sharpie.
That is a brilliant way to put it, yeah.
When you hold that up to the light, the contrast is just absurd. And the wildest part of the entire system is that the hypersonic jet, the highly engineered billion-dollar drug, loses to the cardboard box a shocking amount of the time.
It loses constantly. Drug after drug fails in phase 2 or phase 3 trials, not because the drug didn't have a physiological effect, but because it couldn't reliably beat the blank pill.
So why is this the rule? Why is the barrier to entry seemingly so bizarre?
Well, it is the rule because the fake works.
Right.
It works reliably, it works powerfully, and it works across an astonishingly wide spectrum of human suffering. I mean, the blank pill relieves severe pain. It lifts the mood in clinically depressed patients.
It calms the physical tremors of neurodegenerative diseases.
Exactly. It opens constricted airways in asthmatics. It does these things so dependably and so measurably that medicine literally cannot tell if a real heavily engineered drug is doing anything at all until it can consistently rise above the baseline healing created by the blank.
Which quietly makes the placebo the hidden champion of modern science. I mean, if you think about it, it is the most heavily tested treatment in human history.
Well, by a massive margin. It acts as the control arm in almost every randomized clinical trial ever run. We have administered it millions and millions of times.
And it frequently wins enough to kill highly funded drugs. But here's the paradox. Every single time a trial ends, whether the billion-dollar drug wins or loses the placebo is entirely discarded. It's thrown in the bin.
Yep, right in the trash.
The data is parsed, the paper is published, and the thing that just successfully lowered blood pressure or cured a migraine is treated as statistical trash.
Because it isn't a substance. It has no mechanism of action in a biochemical sense. It is at its core a belief wrapped in a coat of sugar.
The belief being the story that a doctor tells you, right? Like, this pill will make you better.
Exactly.
And I want to just hold this contradiction open for a minute for you listening. Just sit with this. The most rigorous materialist enterprise the human race has ever built, the global medical and pharmaceutical apparatus, is organized at its very foundation around subtracting the healing power of a story.
The entire architecture of the clinical trial exists to isolate that story, measure its physical effect on the body, and slice it off the data so we can see the pure chemistry underneath. Medicine is built on the fundamental premise that this non-material thing, belief, creates such overwhelming, undeniable material noise that it has to be mathematically fenced out.
So we have to ask the obvious question. What exactly is that force? If a story can mimic a beta blocker or an analgesic comer, what are we actually looking at?
Well, we aren't going to answer that question yet.
Nope.
We need to hold that tension open.
Yeah.
Because to understand what this force is, we first have to understand exactly what it can do and exactly how hard the scientific community has tried to prove that it isn't real.
Let's walk the skeptic's path then, because anyone listening with a critical mind is naturally going to start generating objections right now. I know I did.
Oh, absolutely.
When you first hear about the placebo effect, the immediate instinct is to explain it away. You want to look for the methodological flaw, and I think we should tackle those reasonable, intelligent objections right now, one by one.
Let's dismantle them with the literature.
Okay. The most obvious objection, the one most people default to, is that this is all just subjective imagination. It's response bias.
Right, the pleasing the doctor theory.
Yeah, a patient goes to a clinic. They are given a pill by a doctor in a white coat. The doctor is deeply empathetic. They spend time with the patient. The patient inherently wants to please this authority figure. So when the nurse comes around an hour later with a clipboard and asks, on a scale of 1 to 10, how is your pain? The patient just says they feel better.
It's lightness.
Exactly. It's psychological reporting bias. The underlying pathology hasn't changed. The pain is still there. They're just imagining it's not, or they are lying to smooth over the social interaction.
It is a completely logical assumption. It's also completely false. And we have known it's false for decades.
Right.
To see why, we have to go to San Francisco to a study published in 1978 by a team of researchers, Levy, Gordon, and Fields. They were running a study on patients who were recovering from dental surgery, specifically molar extractions.
Which anyone who has had their wisdom teeth pulled knows is not a mild ache. We aren't talking about a tension headache. We are talking about acute, severe physical tissue trauma pain.
Exactly. They've had their gums sliced, bone manipulated, and teeth forcefully removed. In the recovery room, these patients were given a placebo, an intravenous saline solution that they were told was a powerful painkiller. And as expected, a significant number of them reported a sharp, distinct decrease in their pain.
The classic placebo effect in action.
Right. But Levine and his team did something brilliant. They took those specific patients, the ones whose pain had vanished, and they secretly administered a drug called naloxone.
Wait, naloxone. That is the generic name for Narcan, right? The drug paramedics used to instantly reverse an opioid overdose.
That's the one. To understand why this is so profound, we have to look at the pharmacology of naloxone. It is an opioid antagonist. Its molecular shape allows it to perfectly fit into the opioid receptors in the human brain, but it doesn't activate them. It just blocks them. It acts like a piece of gum jammed into a keyhole. It physically prevents opioids, whether it's exogenous heroin or morphine or the body's own endogenous opioids like endorphins, from binding to the receptor and suppressing the pain signal.
So the researchers administer this blocking agent naloxone to the patients who are feeling completely fine because of a sugar pill. What happens?
The pain relief instantly switches off. The severe, agonizing pain of the dental surgery comes rushing back in real time.
Oh, wow. So if the naloxone blocked the relief, that means the relief was chemical.
Precisely. It proves definitively that the sugar pill was not triggering imagination. It wasn't triggering politeness or response bias on a clipboard. The belief that they had received a painkiller caused their brains to manufacture and release real physical endogenous opioids.
That is incredible.
The expectation of relief triggered a highly specific biochemical cascade. When you introduce a drug that physically blocks those chemical receptors, you lose the effect. It is a physical, measurable chemical event triggered entirely by a belief.
That shatters the it's just imagination argument entirely. You can't polite your way through an opioid antagonist.
No, you really can't.
But if we concede that the chemistry is real, it brings up the next major objection. The mechanism we just described relies entirely on a lie.
Right, the deception argument.
Yeah, the whole phenomenon hinges on the doctor successfully tricking your brain into thinking the saline is a narcotic. If I hand you a pill and tell you this is literally just sugar, the chemistry shouldn't happen right. The magic trick requires deception.
That was the prevailing wisdom in medicine for a very long time. It seems totally intuitive. But let's look at a landmark study from 2010 out of Harvard University. A researcher named Ted Kaptchuk ran a trial with 80 patients suffering from irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS.
And IBS is a chronic condition. It involves severe cramping abdominal pain, unpredictable bowel habits. It's deeply disruptive and notoriously difficult to treat even with heavy pharmaceuticals.
It is deeply entrenched in the body's nervous system, specifically the enteric nervous system, the brain-gut axis. So Kaptchuk took these 80 patients and gave them pills. But he explicitly removed the deception.
How did he do that?
He told them in plain, unambiguous words spoken face-to-face that the pills were inert placebos. He told them, these are sugar pills. There's absolutely zero medicine in here.
Wow.
The bottles themselves were even printed with the word placebo. He explained to the patients that they were part of a study to test whether the placebo effect works without deception.
So there is no trick. The patient is staring at a bottle of literal nothing, knowing it is nothing.
And they took the pills twice a day.
Yeah.
The result was that the patients who took the known sugar pills improved significantly anyway. Their symptoms, the cramping, the pain, the disruption, decreased dramatically compared to a control group who got no pills at all.
How's the biology even interpret that? I mean, if the naloxone study proved that belief creates the chemistry, what is the belief here? If they know the pill is fake, what is the spark?
The belief shifts its target. The patient is no longer believing in the pharmacokinetic properties of the pill. They are believing in the ritual of medicine itself.
Yeah.
They are believing in the fact that Harvard researchers are caring for them, monitoring them, and taking their suffering seriously. They are stepping into a structured environment of healing. Or perhaps they are simply believing in the strange paradoxical fact that Kaptchuk explained to them, that placebos sometimes work even when you know.
Right.
Whatever the specific architecture of that belief is, the data is unequivocal. The body responds even when the conscious mind knows there is no active chemical. Deception is not a requirement for belief to steer the biology.
Okay, so we've established that it triggers real chemistry and it doesn't require a lie. But I want to push back on the limits of this. Look at the conditions we've discussed so far. Postoperative pain, IBS. We mentioned depression earlier. These are notoriously subjective conditions.
They are, yeah.
They fluctuate heavily based on stress. They are deeply tied to the nervous system and mood. So the skeptic's argument here is that this force only works for soft, fuzzy symptoms. It works for things that are modulated by the brain's perception. But you aren't going to cure a structural defect with a sugar pill. You can't fix a broken bone or a torn ligament with a belief.
This is where we cross a very distinct line in the sand, moving from subjective perception into hard, physical realities. Let's look at the physical limits. In 2002, the New England Journal of Medicine, which is arguably the most prestigious medical journal on the planet, published a study by a Houston-based orthopedic surgeon named Bruce Moseley.
A surgeon. So we are leaving the realm of pills and pharmacology entirely.
We were moving into the operating theater. Moseley ran a randomized controlled trial on 180 patients suffering from severe osteoarthritis of the knee. This is not a fuzzy symptom.
No.
This is debilitating joint pain caused by physical degradation. The cartilage has worn away, and you literally have bone rubbing on bone. It is a hard structural mechanical failure of the joint.
Right there is physical debris in the knee capsule. It's inflamed. It's structurally unsound.
Exactly. Moseley divided these 180 patients into different groups. Half of them received a standard real arthroscopic knee operation. The patient is put under anesthesia. The surgeon goes in with instruments, cleans out the degraded cartilage, flushes the joint of debris, shaves down rough bone, and repairs what can mechanically be repaired.
Okay. And the other half?
The other half received a fake surgery, a sham operation.
I need you to explain exactly what a fake knee surgery entails, because ethically and logistically that sounds wild.
It is wild, but it looks identical to a real one from the patient's perspective. The patients in the sham group were wheeled into the operating room. They were given real intravenous anesthesia. Once they were unconscious, Moseley made the exact same incisions, the standard 3 portals on their knees.
So he actually cut them?
He did. And to simulate the sounds and timing of the real surgery, the surgical team asked for the same instruments. They splashed saline water onto the knee to mimic the sound of the lavage, the washing of the joint. They did everything exactly the same for the exact same amount of time. And then they simply sewed the incisions back up. They did not insert the arthroscope. They did not scrape a single piece of cartilage. They repaired absolutely nothing inside the knee.
They just cut the skin and sewed it back together.
It is the ultimate placebo. And Moseley tracked these 180 patients over a 2-year period. He didn't just ask them how they felt, he evaluated them on objective functional scales, their mobility, their walking speed, their ability to climb stairs without wincing.
What happened?
2 years later, the fake surgeries were doing just as well as the real ones.
Come on.
Is in the data. The patients who had nothing but superficial skin cuts and saline splash on their knees were walking better, experiencing significantly less pain and functioning at the exact same level as the people who had their joints physically scraped and repaired by an orthopedic surgeon.
Just sit with the physical reality of that. Someone's knee is structurally failing. You put them under, you cut the skin, you do nothing, you sew them up, and their physical reality changes to match the belief that they were mechanically repaired.
Exactly.
They are walking upstairs on a knee that still has the exact same degraded cartilage it had before the surgery, but the body is no longer treating it as a failure.
The belief physically restructures their experience of a heavily degraded joint. It proves that this force is not confined to soft, subjective things. It overrides mechanical degradation.
Okay, but if belief is doing this, if it can summon endorphins and override bone-on-bone arthritis, there is a comforting conclusion you can draw here. The skeptic might say, fine, belief is powerful, but it's just the body's natural healing mechanism turning on. It's an evolutionary survival trait. Belief is fundamentally a positive healing force. It's the body being kind to itself.
I genuinely wish that were true. But we have to introduce the dark side of this phenomenon, because it runs in reverse with the exact same power. If belief is a mechanism that translates expectation into biology, we have to understand that this mechanism has no moral compass. It doesn't only heal, it simply translates.
What does the reverse look like biologically?
It is called the nocebo effect, where the placebo is the expectation of a positive outcome leading to healing. The nocebo is the expectation of a negative outcome leading to harm. And it is terrifyingly reliable. Let's look at the clinical trials for statins.
Statins are the cholesterol-lowering drugs, right? Millions and millions of people take them daily to prevent heart attacks.
Exactly. And a well-known side effect of statins is myalgia, severe muscle pain, and weakness. Now, when you run a clinical trial, ethical guidelines mandate that you provide informed consent. You have to warn the participants. So the doctors tell them, you're taking a pill. It might be the active drug, or it might be a placebo. But you need to be aware that a side effect can be severe muscle pain.
They plant the seed of a negative expectation.
And what happens? A massive percentage of the people in the sugar pill group, the group receiving absolutely zero active medication, start reporting debilitating muscle pain.
They manufacture it.
Out of thin air.
Yeah.
They're taking an inert blank. There is no chemical in their system causing tissue inflammation or muscle breakdown. But because an authority figure warned them of a side effect, their belief obeys that harmful order just as loyally as it obeys a healing order. They experience real agonizing muscle aches simply because they expect to.
That is wild.
The body manifests the harm. It alters pain processing pathways, likely involving molecules like cholecystinin, which actually amplifies pain signals in the nervous system simply based on the expectation of distress.
That is deeply unsettling. It's like a biological self-fulfilling prophecy, but aimed in a destructive direction.
It proves that this force isn't just healing. It is translation. It translates the story into physical reality, regardless of whether the story is a comedy or a tragedy.
Okay, I have one final objection for the skeptic's walk. We've established that it's chemical. It doesn't need deception. It alters hard physical realities like arthritis, and it can harm just as easily as it heals. But look at the through line of every single example we just discussed. A dentist's chair in San Francisco, a Harvard research clinic, a surgical operating theater in Houston, a highly regulated pharmaceutical drug trial.
Right, they're all medical settings.
Every single one of these scenarios requires the intense trappings of modern medical authority. It requires the sterile environment, the white coats, the clipboards, the rituals of care. The skeptic would say, sure, this force exists, but it's confined to clinics. You need sick people and doctors to activate it. It doesn't apply to normal life.
That is the final illusion we have to break today. Because if we limit this to hospitals, we are missing the vast majority of where this force operates. Let's take it completely out of the medical sphere and into ordinary everyday life. Let's start with a study from 2007 by a researcher named Alia Crum. She ran a study with 84 hotel maids.
Hotel maids, okay, we are a long way from the surgical theater.
Hotel maids perform intense, grueling physical labor all day long. They are pushing heavy carts, lifting mattresses, scrubbing bathrooms, vacuuming. It is highly active work. But when Crum surveyed these 84 women, the vast majority of them reported that they didn't get any regular exercise. They viewed their work purely as labor, as a chore. They didn't view it as a workout.
Right. They are in gym clothes, they aren't on a treadmill, so in their minds it doesn't count.
Exactly. So Crum split them into two groups. For the control group, she changed absolutely nothing. But for the other group, she gave a short, simple presentation. She didn't change their schedules, she didn't alter their diets, and she didn't ask them to work any harder.
What did she do?
She simply showed them data explaining how the physical tasks they already performed every single day, lifting, pushing, walking met, or exceeded the Surgeon General's requirements for an active, healthy lifestyle. She explicitly told them, the work you were already doing is excellent exercise.
She just changed the label on the activity they were already performing.
She shifted the belief about the work. 4 weeks later, she came back and measured them. The control group hadn't changed. But the group that had received the presentation, the group that simply believed their work was exercise, had measurably changed. With no actual alteration to their physical routine, that group dropped in weight. Their systolic blood pressure dropped significantly. Their body fat percentage went down.
Just from being told their work counted, how does the biology square that?
We can look at the physiological mechanisms of stress. When you view your physical labor merely as an exhausting, low-status chore, your body is likely operating under a low-grade chronic stress response. High cortisol, which promotes fat storage and raises blood pressure.
Makes sense.
But when the belief shifts, when you view the exact same physical movement as beneficial, healthy exercise, the psychological stress diminishes. The cortisol levels drop, allowing the cardiovascular system to relax and the metabolism to shift away from fat storage. The physical body reorganized its biomarkers to match the new belief about the work.
That is wild. But let's look at another one that dives directly into the digestive system. The milkshake study.
This was also Alia Crum's work. Participants were brought into a lab on 2 different occasions and given a milkshake. One time, the bottle was labeled as Indulgence, a decadent, high-calorie, heavy cream treat containing 620 calories. The other time, they were given a shake labeled Sensi Shake, a sensible low-calorie, zero-fat diet shake containing only 140 calories.
But I'm guessing the shakes were not what they claimed to be.
They were identical. On both occasions, the participants were drinking the exact same 380-calorie milkshake. The only difference was the label on the bottle. But Crum wasn't just asking them how full they felt. She was drawing their blood to measure their levels of ghrelin.
Right. Ghrelin is known as the hunger hormone. Your stomach produces it to signal to your brain that you need food. When you eat a big meal, your ghrelin levels plummet, signaling satiety.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what did the blood work show? When the participants drank the identically formulated shake that was labeled Indulgence, their ghrelin levels plummeted. Their digestive system reacted exactly as if they had consumed a massive, heavy 620-calorie bomb.
Wow.
But when they drank the exact same shake labeled Sensi Shake, their ghrelin levels stayed relatively flat, dropping only slightly.
The label alone changed the hormone response in the gut. The digestive chemistry physically altered itself based entirely on the belief about the food, not the nutritional content of the food itself.
The belief didn't just change their perception of hunger, it dictated the endocrinology of their stomach. And this phenomenon extends beyond just our personal internal biology. It leaks out into how our beliefs shape the physical realities of the people around us. Take Robert Rosenthal's famous study with teachers and students.
Ah, the Pygmalion effect.
Yes. Rosenthal administered a standard IQ test to a class of elementary school students, but then he explicitly lied to the teachers. He randomly selected a handful of students from the class list and told the teachers, according to our highly advanced predictive tests, these specific children are about to experience a massive intellectual growth spurt. They are late bloomers. You're going to see a leap in their cognitive ability this year.
But the kids were chosen completely at random. They weren't actually gifted.
Completely random. But at the end of the school year, Rosenthal came back and administered another IQ test. The randomly chosen children, the ones whose teachers believed they were on the verge of intellectual greatness, actually scored significantly higher on their measured IQ than the rest of the class.
The teacher's belief physically altered the child's cognitive performance.
The teacher's mere belief subtly altered the environment. It changed how long the teacher waited for an answer, the tone of voice they used, the micro-expressions of encouragement. And those subtle belief-driven changes in the environment raised the pupil's actual measured intelligence.
Okay, I want to pause here for a second because we have a responsibility as a show. We have to state the mandatory caveats loudly and clearly. Because I know people have heard of the Rosenthal study, and I know exactly where this kind of data can be twisted.
Let's be entirely transparent. Honesty is the point here. The size of that specific effect, the Pygmalion effect, varies wildly across replications. Sometimes researchers find a small bump. Sometimes the effect is negligible.
Right.
Furthermore, the famous modern school version of this concept, which was heavily branded and sold as growth mindset, was massively oversold to the public and to school districts. Huge, rigorous, large-scale replications of growth mindset interventions have consistently shrunk the effect size down to almost nothing in many real-world settings.
We are only dealing with published data control groups and failed replications. We are mapping the edges of a measurable biological phenomenon, not handing you a magic wand to wish your way to $1 million.
Precisely. We have to respect the limits of the data and the noise of reality. But even with the strictest caveats applied, the baseline reality of the literature remains intact. Belief exerts a physical, measurable force on human biology. Let's look at the long view to prove that. A study that is incredibly robust, conducted by Levy at Yale University. She followed 660 people for over 20 years.
A 20-year longitudinal study is serious, undeniable data. It's not a lab trick.
No, it's not. She was looking at their attitudes toward aging. At the beginning of the study, she surveyed them to determine how they viewed getting older. Did they see it as an inevitable time of decline, frailty, and uselessness? Or did they hold positive beliefs, seeing it as a time of wisdom, continued growth, and contribution? And then she simply tracked their mortality for 2 decades.
And what did she find?
She found that the people who held positive beliefs about their own aging outlived the people with negative beliefs.
By how much?
A few months.
By 7.5 years.
7.5 years of actual life.
Yes. That is a wider gap in life expectancy than you get from having low blood pressure. It is a wider gap than having low cholesterol. It is a larger survival advantage than entirely avoiding smoking. The foundational belief about aging had a stronger mortality impact than the most fundamental physiological markers that modern medicine tracks.
Okay, let's summarize the feeling in the room right now. We've looked at the naloxone blocking the pain relief. We've looked at the honest placebos with IBS, the fake knee surgeries in Houston, the muscle pain of the Nocebo effect, the hotel maids lowering their blood pressure, the milkshake altering gut hormones, the aging study adding 7 years to a lifespan. Looking at all of this, it feels settled. The mystery feels solved. Belief is real. It's a physical force. It operates via known pathways like endorphins and cortisol. It's everywhere, and it can be measured. It feels like we've mapped the territory. It does feel that way. It feels like we have a handle on it.
So we figured it out. We know what it is and what it does.
And now we are going to take all of that back.
This is the turn. This is where it gets incredibly strange.
We need to slow down here.
Yeah.
Because this is the hinge of everything we were talking about today. Everything we just told you, all of those incredible studies, all of those measurable biological effects, that is just the shadow. Here is the thing casting it.
Explain that. What do you mean it's just the shadow?
I want you to look again at that whole list of studies we just walked through. In order for every single one of those studies to count as science, the researchers had to do 2 very specific things. They had to average the results across many people, and they had to isolate one single variable while holding the rest of the world still.
Right. That's the definition of the scientific method. You isolate a variable to prove it causes an effect, and you average it across a population to prove it isn't a fluke.
Exactly. That is what a clinical trial is. It is a machine perfectly designed for averaging and isolating. But here's the massive structural blind spot belief is exactly the thing that the scientific machine is built to miss.
Why? Why is it built to miss it?
Think about averaging. When Bruce Moseley averages the data of 180 patients getting fake knee surgery, he gets a beautiful, statistically significant curve that proves the placebo effect exists. But averaging mathematically grounds out the outlier.
Right.
It erases the one person at the far end of the curve whose entire complex life of belief might have been the absolute deciding factor in a truly miraculous, medically impossible recovery. That individual, with their specific deeply held convictions, simply vanishes into the mean.
They become a tiny data point in a smooth line, and their individual extremity is graced.
And then think about isolating. The golden rule of a trial is that you only test one thing at a time. One pill. One variable. But isolating outlaws the real-world situation. It outlaws reality. Because in reality, a single human being has 100 different beliefs pulling at them all at once. Beliefs about their doctor, their God, their family, their worthiness to live their deep-seated fear of death. You cannot isolate a single thread of belief in a human mind without cutting it away from the fabric that gives it strength.
So you're saying that the scientific method itself, the very tool we use to verify reality, is the wrong tool for measuring this force?
I am saying that the tidy, subtractable placebo effect that we see in a clinical trial, the 30% pain reduction, the slight drop in blood pressure, the statistical bumps, that is not the size of this force. That is the floor. It is just a shadow thrown onto an instrument that was explicitly designed to look away from it.
Meaning no one has ever measured the ceiling.
Because there is no instrument for it. To measure the ceiling of what belief can do, you would have to put a scientific gauge on one whole complex, messy, infinitely believing human being in the totality of their life. And the scientific method structurally cannot do that. The moment you average them with someone else to make it science, you lose the ceiling.
But the ceiling leaks out anyway, doesn't it?
It does. The ceiling leaks out in the cases that medicine cannot average, the cases that are so wild, so singular that they ruin the statistical curve entirely. And because medicine doesn't know what to do with them, it files them away under a very specific label, which is anomaly.
We're going to look at 4 of these anomalies, and we're going to take our time with these. We are not going to rush because these 4 cases represent the absolute edge of the map. Let's start with anomaly number 1. The year is 1957.
This is a case report published by a psychologist named Klopfer. It is the story of a man he referred to as Mr. Wright.
Walk us through what happened with Mr. Wright.
Mr. Wright was dying of severe cancer of the lymph nodes. His condition was end stage. The tumors throughout his body, in his neck, his armpits, his groin, his chest, they were the size of oranges.
The size of oranges?
Yes. His lymphatic system was entirely compromised. He was bedridden, he required constant oxygen, and his doctors, led by a physician named Dr. Philip West, had given him days to live. But Mr. Wright had read in the medical news about an experimental new drug called Krebiozin.
Krebiozin was an unproven serum, right? Like completely experimental.
Completely experimental. But Mr. Wright became utterly convinced that Krebiozin was his salvation. He begged Dr. West for an injection. Now, Dr. West knew Krebiozin was highly experimental and the protocol dictated it wasn't for patients this close to death. But his patient was literally days away from dying and begging for a chance. So Dr. West managed to procure a single dose and he administered it to Mr. Wright on a Friday. Dr. West then left the hospital for the weekend, fully expecting Mr. Wright to be dead by Monday.
But he wasn't dead.
He wasn't. When Dr. West returned on Monday morning, he found Mr. Wright not only alive, but out of bed, walking around the ward and happily chatting with the nurses. And the tumors, the massive orange-sized tumors throughout his lymphatic system, Dr. West wrote in his clinical notes that they had melted like snowballs on a hot stove. They had shrunk to half their original size in a single weekend.
Wait, in one weekend?
In one weekend. Within 10 days of that injection, Mr. Wright was discharged from the hospital, completely asymptomatic. He even flew his own private plane shortly after.
The absolute belief in the drug melted massive cellular mutations in 48 hours.
It appears so. But here is where the story turns into a tragedy of belief. 2 months later, the newspapers and medical journals started reporting on the wider clinical trials of Krebiozin, and the reports were disastrous. The early data showed that Krebiozin was likely worthless. He was a failure in the lab.
And Mr. Wright reads these reports.
He reads them, and his belief is shattered. Immediately after reading the news, he collapsed. He was readmitted to the hospital, and his tumors rapidly grew back to their original size.
So his doctor, Dr. West, realizes what is happening. He realizes he is watching a biological manifestation of pure belief.
Yes. Dr. West realized that the drug didn't save Mr. Wright. The story of the drug saved him. So Dr. West decided to perform a double-blind trial on one single man. He went to Mr. Wright and lied to him. He told him, "Don't listen to the newspapers. The batch of Krebiosa you got was degraded, which is why you relapsed. The reason it failed in trials is because the formula was off. But I have just received a brand new, highly purified double-strength batch."
But he didn't have Krebiosa.
No. Dr. West injected Mr. Wright with nothing but plain distilled water.
And what happened the second time? It works again.
The tumors melted a second time. The distilled water imbued with Mr. Wright's renewed absolute belief eradicated the orange-sized masses again. He recovered, he left the hospital, and he lived a vibrant, completely healthy life for another 2 months.
Until the final verdict.
Until the American Medical Association published their final definitive ironclad verdict on Krebiosin. This is the nationwide press release. The AMA formally declared Krebiosin a quack remedy. It contained nothing of medical value. It did absolutely nothing.
The ultimate rug pull by reality.
Mr. Wright read that final verdict. Within a few days, he lost all faith. He deteriorated rapidly, the tumors returned with a vengeance, and he died less than a week later.
Okay, we have to state the caveat clearly. This is a single case report. It is an anecdote published in 1957. It is not a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial of 10,000 people.
But that is exactly the point. It is exactly the size of a thing that a clinical trial is built to erase. If Mr. Wright was participant number 42 in a massive clinical trial for Krebiosin, his miraculous weekend recovery, and his subsequent death would just be flattened out in the final statistical average. The trial would conclude that the drug failed. But when you isolate one man and watch his tumors melt, grow back, melt again on distilled water, and then kill him when a newspaper tells him to die, you are looking at the ceiling. You are looking at a force that can dismantle orange-sized cellular mutations in 48 hours.
It is terrifying. It breaks the mechanistic view of the body completely. Let's move to the next anomaly number 2, because if Mr. Wright is a story from the 1950s, a skeptic might want something a bit more modern, something we can literally see with our own eyes. Let's look at a brain scan.
The year is 2001. A study published in the journal Science, which is essentially the pinnacle of scientific publishing globally. Researchers were looking at patients with Parkinson's disease.
Now let's explain the mechanics of Parkinson's for a moment. It is a neurodegenerative disorder. It physically destroys neurons in a part of the brain called the substantia nigra, which is the area responsible for producing dopamine. Dopamine is the chemical neurotransmitter that allows for smooth, coordinated muscle movement. That's why Parkinson's causes severe tremors, rigidity, and loss of motor control.
Exactly. The factory in the brain that makes dopamine is broken. It is structurally failing. So the medicines we use for Parkinson's, like levodopa, are designed to artificially replace that missing dopamine. In this 2001 study, researchers took Parkinson's patients, put them into a PT scan, which is a machine that allows you to see metabolic activity and chemical release in the brain in real time, and they gave them an injection. But it was a placebo injection, just saline. They told the patients it was a powerful new Parkinson's drug.
And they watch the brain on the screen while this happens?
They watch the brain. And as the belief takes hold, as the patient believes they have just been given the medicine, the PET scan lights up. The brain begins pouring its own endogenous dopamine into the exact areas that were depleted.
Wait, the disease physically destroys the dopamine-producing cells. The injection is just salt water. Where is the dopamine coming from?
The brain is manufacturing it. The belief didn't just soften a psychological symptom, it made a physically damaged, deteriorating brain manufacture its own missing chemical. You can literally watch the belief turn into physical brain chemistry on a glowing screen. The expectation of dopamine caused the production of dopamine even in a system that is theoretically broken.
That is profound. You think of the brain as an engine, and if a gear is broken, it's broken. The machine stops. But here the ghost in the machine, the belief, is somehow forcing the broken gear to turn anyway. It is synthesizing chemistry out of an expectation.
It suggests that the limitation we observe in disease is not always purely structural. Sometimes the limitation is permission, and belief grants the permission for the body to access reserves or pathways it supposedly doesn't have.
Let's push that even further with anomaly number 3, because this next one involves literal physical tissue, the sham brain surgery.
This takes us to 2004. We've talked about a fake knee surgery, which is wild enough. But this was a double-blind trial for fetal cell brain transplants, again, for Parkinson's disease.
Fetal cell transplants. We are talking about literally grafting new, healthy neurological tissue into the patient's brain to replace the dying cells.
Yes, a highly invasive cutting-edge neurosurgery. And because it's a trial to meet the gold standard of science, they need a control group. So they ran the real neurosurgery against a sham neurosurgery.
You're telling me they did fake brain surgery on human beings?
They did. For the sham group, the patients were put under general anesthesia. The surgeons drilled actual burr holes into the patient's skull. They went through all the intense, time-consuming motions of the surgery in the operating room, but they did not implant any fetal cells. They simply closed the skull back up.
Ethically, the idea of drilling into a human skull for a placebo is a staggering thing to contemplate. But scientifically, what did they find?
They tracked the patients over the following year. And 1 year later, they looked at the data to see who improved the most, who had the most significant reduction in tremors, the best recovery of movement, the highest quality of life. The patients who improved the most were not the ones who received the actual physical fetal cell transplant.
They weren't.
No. The patients who improved the most were the ones who believed they had received the transplant, regardless of which operation they actually got.
Let me make sure I am framing this correctly. You have a study that is built explicitly spending millions of dollars and risking human lives to measure the physical efficacy of a biological brain graft. And the physical graft lost the patient's belief about the graft.
The physical reality of having brand new healthy tissue grafted into the brain was less powerful in steering the body's recovery than the story the patient believed about what happened while they were unconscious. The belief overpowered the scalpel.
Okay, we have one more anomaly. Anomaly number 4. And this is perhaps the most famous and certainly the most surreal, the time machine.
The year is 1979. A psychologist named Ellen Langer at Harvard designed a study called the counterclockwise study. She took 8 men in their late 70s. These were men who were showing all the typical undeniable signs of aging frailty: poor memory, diminished eyesight, arthritis, slow gait.
The normal expected decline of the human body.
Yes. She took these 8 men to a retrofitted monastery in Peterborough, New Hampshire, and this building had been meticulously furnished and stocked to look exactly as it would have 20 years earlier in 1959.
So they're stepping into a total immersion time capsule.
Total immersion. The radios only played music and news broadcasts from 1959. The magazines on the tables were issues of Life and Saturday Evening Post from 1959. They watched Ed Sullivan on a black and white TV. But the critical instruction Langer gave them was this: for 1 week, they were not allowed to reminisce about 1959. They were not allowed to treat it as a fond memory of the past. They were instructed to inhabit it in the present tense.
They had to act as if it was currently 1959.
They were told to be the men they were 20 years ago. They discussed the historical events of 1959, like the launch of the first satellite or Fidel Castro taking over Cuba, as if they were breaking news. They were treated as capable, independent men in their 50s, not frail men in their late 70s. Nobody carried their bags to their rooms. Nobody treated them like invalids. They had to organize their own meals and take care of themselves.
And what happened after a week of this intense psychological time travel?
By the end of the week, the physical measurements were astounding. Their eyesight had measurably improved. Their hearing was sharper. Their memory scores on cognitive tests went up significantly. Their grip strength increased. Their joints were more flexible. Independent observers who looked at before and after photos without knowing which judged them to look significantly younger at the end of the week. Just by inhabiting the psychological space of being 20 years younger, their bodies physically reversed the biomarkers of aging in 7 days.
Okay, I have to step in here and state the caveat loudly, because this sounds like science fiction.
It absolutely does.
Ellen Langer never published this specific study in a peer-reviewed journal. She wrote about it in a book later. And because of the immense cost and logistical difficulty of retrofitting entire buildings and running immersive psychological experiments, it has not been cleanly, rigorously replicated in a large-scale way. We are sharing it here as the vivid edge of the map, as a profound illustration of what might be possible, not as ironclad, unquestionable proof.
That is a vital caveat. But even if you discount Langer's monastery entirely, you are still left with Mr. Wright's melting tumors, the dopamine glowing on the PAT scan, and the sham brain surgery beating the real fetal cell transplant.
And so we arrive at this fully open contradiction, and it is much larger now than when we began the episode. Let's just state it plainly.
The single strongest, most reliable agent in medicine, the force that can melt tumors, manufacture dopamine, and overpower brain grafts, is the one thing that medicine's own method exists to subtract.
We spend billions of dollars fencing it out of every trial.
And because we fence it out, we have no gauge for it in a single whole human life. The scientific method is structurally blind to the very thing that might be driving the deepest healing.
So what do we do with that? How do we resolve this massive blind spot? If medicine is built to miss it, what is the answer?
We are not going to resolve it quite yet. I want you to sit in the vastness of that contradiction for just a moment.
It feels incredibly uncomfortable. It feels like the entire bedrock of how we verify reality is cracked.
It is uncomfortable. But it's also the gateway to understanding how reality actually operates outside the laboratory.
Okay, I think it's time. Bring us home. Give us the resolution.
Here is the reveal. And I hope this feels like a wave of relief because it reframes everything. The blank pill's immense power, all these anomalies we just discussed, they were never just a quirky glitch in the medical system. They aren't a mistake.
Then what are they?
Medicine is simply the only field on Earth honest enough to fight this force.
Say that again.
Medicine is the only institution we have that is forced to battle belief. Why? Because it is the only field that is forced to subtract it in order to see anything else at all. If you want to know if a specific chemical lowers blood pressure, you have to carve away the belief, otherwise the belief itself will lower the blood pressure and you'll never know what the chemical did. Medicine is fighting belief because it is trying to isolate chemistry.
But nowhere else does that.
Exactly. Nowhere else on Earth even tries. The exact same current, this incredibly powerful force that medicine spends billions of dollars fencing out of its trials, this force that can physically alter tissue and brain chemistry, is running completely unsubtracted and completely ungauged everywhere else in the world.
It is running through every classroom. When that teacher looks at a kid and believes they are a genius or believes they are a failure, there is no placebo control group for that kid's life.
It is running through every sales floor, every political rally. Every single time a doctor gives you a diagnosis, the authority in their voice is dosing you with a belief that will steer your body's physiological response, and no one is subtracting it to see what would have happened otherwise.
It's running through every mirror you look into every morning. When you decide what kind of person is looking back at you and what that person is capable of enduring.
In the clinic, we know this force is in the room. The doctors know it, the researchers know it, and they build massive, expensive statistical machines to try and remove it. But everywhere else, in your home, in your career, in your relationships, it is simply the water we are swimming in. And because we don't have clinical trials for our daily lives, we can't even see the water.
So belief moves the body directly. It steers what a person attempts, how long they persist in the face of failure, and what they physically allow themselves to perceive in the world around them.
It does, but we also have to ground this. Reality still grades the final result. Belief is a steering wheel, not a magic wand. Mr. Wright's belief was powerful enough to melt a tumor in 48 hours. But it could not survive the absolute external reality of a nationwide newspaper report. Belief interacts with reality. It doesn't always defeat it.
But the shadow remains. The clinical trials we've talked about today, the sugar pills, the fake surgeries, the PT scans, they are simply the one place humanity ever managed to catch this invisible force under glass.
And even there, even under the glass of the most rigorous science we have, we only ever caught its shadow.
I want to turn directly to you listening to this right now. We aren't going to end with a sermon. I just want to leave you with an image. Every single one of us is running an uncontrolled trial on ourselves. All day, every day.
There is no blank pill to compare your life against. No one is blinded to the conditions.
It is the recovery you expect to happen or the recovery you secretly don't expect. It is the career you've decided is meant for someone like you or the ceiling you've decided you can't break through. It's the pain you brace for before it even arrives. You are dosed hourly by beliefs that nobody ever screened for safety or efficacy. And here's the final thing I want you to carry out the door today. Those doses were all prescribed before any of us was old enough to read the label. So who wrote your prescriptions?
Next week, the inheritance.
This was Chapter 2 of the Pistomechanics podcast.
The Pistomechanics podcast.